All right, let's get right into it. When we think about the Vietnam War, our minds usually jump to the big picture, right? North versus South, communism versus capitalism. But what if I told you that before all of that really kicked off, the entire fate of South Vietnam was sealed in a brutal street battle, not against the North, but against a gangster army that ran the capital city like their own personal king?
So picture this. It's 1954. The French have just been defeated, and the Geneva Accords have literally sliced Vietnam in two right at the 17th parallel. Down south, a brand new country, South Vietnam, is trying to get on its feet, with Saigon as its capital. It's this moment of incredible uncertainty, a new nation trying to rise from the ashes of a colonial war.
But here's the crazy part. This new government, the one backed by the United States, it was pretty much a government in name only. Sure, it controlled a few official buildings, maybe a few city blocks around the palace, but it absolutely did not control its own capital city. Saigon belonged to somebody else entirely.
And that brings us to the central mystery we're unpacking today. If the Prime Minister wasn't in charge, who was really pulling the strings in Saigon? Well, the answer is way more wild than you'd probably guess.
I want you to meet the Bin Sween. And look, calling them a gang doesn't even begin to cover it. These guys were a parallel state, a full-blown criminal empire that had its hooks in literally every part of Saigon. They started out as simple river pirates, but through a whole lot of violence and some seriously sharp business moves, they became the true masters of the city.
I mean, the power imbalance was just staggering. You've got the official government on one side, basically stuck in their little administrative bubble. And on the other side, the Bing Swin. They didn't just pay off the cops, they were the national police. They owned the transportation systems, they controlled every single vice operation you can imagine, from the opium dens to the brothels.
And sitting at the top of this whole empire was a guy named Le Van Vienne, but everybody called him Bai Vienne. This was a man who couldn't even read or write, a former river pirate who became one of the richest, most powerful men in all of Asia. And that comparison to Pablo Escobar? It's not an exaggeration at all. He built a kingdom on vice, violence, and political power.
And what an empire it was. We're talking about a massive network of opium dens, huge casinos. He even ran this state-of-the-art brothel called the Hall of Mirrors, which was like an assembly line with 1,200 women. He commanded his own private army of 40,000 soldiers. And just to really complete the supervillain aesthetic, he kept pet tigers, pythons, and crocodiles at his headquarters.
And all of this was fueled by just unbelievable amounts of cash. Just one of his casinos, the Grand Monde, was pulling in what would be over $220,000 every single day. This wasn't just a criminal gang, it was a multinational corporation of vice, and that money gave them incredible power.
But a challenger was about to step into the ring. Enter No Den Diem. He's appointed prime minister in 1954, and his job is basically to build a nation from nothing. And he knows, right from the start, that his very first obstacle is the criminal kingdom running his capital.
You literally could not invent a more perfect opposite to the flashy gangster Bai Vienne. Diem was a serious, devout Catholic. He was a fierce nationalist who hated the French colonialists just as much as he hated the communists. He was disciplined, principled, and totally convinced that he was on a mission to save South Vietnam. And, most importantly, he had the full backing of the American CIA.
But Diem wasn't just facing off against a crime lord. No, his bigger problem was trying to lead a country that was in the middle of this massive, chaotic social upheaval. And that chaos created the perfect backdrop for the collision that was about to happen.
See, that line drawn on the map, the 17th parallel, it wasn't just a border. It kicked off a 300-day period where people could move freely between the North and the South. What happened next was nothing short of a human flood.
Over 860,000 people, most of them Catholic Northerners, packed up everything they owned and fled south. They were absolutely terrified of communist rule and what it would mean for their families and their faith. The Americans called it the passage to freedom, and it was just a massive social shock to the system.
And this is where the real trouble brewed. These newcomers weren't exactly welcomed with open arms. Southerners started to resent them, seeing them as outsiders, as carpetbaggers who were getting all this special treatment from Diem's government, partly because many of them shared his Catholic faith. This created these deep, simmering tensions. The country was a tinderbox of divided loyalties, which made Diem's job of building a unified nation feel almost impossible.
So, you've got a gangster king holding the city hostage, a new prime minister determined to create a nation, and a city just fracturing under all this social pressure. Something had to give.
And in April 1955, it did. Diem decided he couldn't build a country while sharing his capital. He gave the Binh Xuyen an ultimatum: give up or be destroyed.
Now make no mistake, this was not just a local turf war. This was the Cold War playing out in miniature on the streets of Saigon. The Binh Xuyen were being armed and supported by French military intelligence, who wanted to keep their influence in Vietnam. And Diem's army? It was being funded and advised by the American CIA. This was a proxy war, fought between two supposed allies.
The battle itself was incredibly swift and savage. It kicked off on April 28th, and the city's densely packed Chinese district basically became a free-fire zone. For a solid week, mortars and artillery just hammered the city. Diem's soldiers fought house to house. The real turning point came when his elite paratroopers stormed the Grand Mon Casino, the very heart of the Binh Xuyen Empire. After that, it was pretty much over. But that victory came at a terrible cost. Somewhere between 500 and 1,000 people were killed. And the brutal tactics used by both sides left 20,000 civilians without a home. Entire neighborhoods were just flattened. Saigon had been saved, but part of it was destroyed to do it.
So, Diem had won. He gambled everything, and he broke the back of the Binh Xuyen. But what kind of victory was it really? What did it actually mean for the future of this new country, South Vietnam?
Well, the aftermath completely changed the game. Bai Vien got away, fleeing to Paris with his millions. The French lost their foothold, and American influence became #1 in Saigon. And Diem? He was now the undisputed strongman. But look closely at that last point, because it's so important. Nearly 2,000 of those defeated gangsters didn't just go home. They melted away into the countryside and joined the underground communist forces, taking all their fighting skills with them.
Right after Diem's victory, the American backstory was simple and clean. South Vietnam was a success. Those northern migrants were heroes who had voted with their feet, choosing freedom over communism. They were the building blocks of this new, strong, anti-communist nation.
But as the years passed and Diem's government became more and more authoritarian, that shiny narrative started to tarnish. The very same migrants came to be seen by many Southerners as an isolated, privileged group who acted as the political shock troops for a repressive regime. The unity that Diem had fought for was built on a very shaky foundation of social division. And that really brings us to the final, lingering question here. The battle for Saigon was, without a doubt, a huge victory for Ngo Dinh Diem. It took out a rival, secured his power, and put South Vietnam squarely in the American camp. But in crushing that one enemy, did he accidentally set the stage for a much, much bigger war? Did this battle really forge a nation? Or did it just paper over the cracks that would soon shatter into the Vietnam War we all know?